Hello and welcome to the NVR Podcast number 6. I'm Rachael Aylmer.
And I'm Vasiliki Loumpa.
Today we're talking about NVR in young people's mental health. Welcome, Vasiliki.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. You're our guest host on the podcast this week in Peter's absence in the US. So thank you for your time and thank you for coming. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Vasiliki. I am an NVR UK practitioner and associate with PartnershipProjects. I run my own private practice, and but up until very recently, I worked in the NHS in child and adolescent mental health. And so today I wanted to talk a little bit about my experience with NVR and young people who experience those kind of difficulties and the work with the parents.
It's wonderful to have you here. And I know we've worked together lots of times, many years. You bring a wealth of expertise and knowledge in your experience of inpatient units in the NHS and working on the wards with young people who are struggling with their mental health. So it's a brilliant topic. And I'm sure we're going to talk longer than the allocated time because there's so much to talk about. I guess what would be a really strong starting point to think and talk about mental health and NVR in young people?
I suppose an important thing to start with is what we mean by mental health, because that's quite wide. And I think often the more prominent mental health concerns that we see in young people these days are anxiety and low mood, suicidal thoughts, maybe self-harm. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that. But I also wanted to talk a little bit maybe about eating disorders, because I also have experience in using NVR with that. And I suppose it's also to reassure people that NVR can be helpful in those situations. I know a lot of practitioners or parents might be worried about how they can use NVR in those situations, because traditionally NVR has been nonviolent resistance and new authority have been
focuses on
with violence and aggression. But just to say that I've had really, really positive experience with parents who used NVR to help young people who were struggling with those kind of issues.
Brilliant. What a lovely starting point. So I guess talking about anxieties in young people, how can NVR help that? How can NVR support parent and caregivers managing a young person's anxieties, particularly when they are admitted to a hospital?
Yeah, I think it's quite important to start from a position of compassion with the young person, and to think of NVR as well as a compassionate approach. This is to help the young person and the parents. So it's a compassionate approach both for the parents, and often in child and adolescent mental health, we focus on the young people and forget how difficult things can be for the parents. So that's really, really important. And that's where NVR's strong point is, that it supports the parents in a compassionate way for the child. So I think the best thing for the parent to do in terms of NVR, and what I've seen really working with the parents that I'm working with, is that starting from a position of really understanding how difficult things are for the child, which helps to de-escalate the situation. Because a lot of the time when parents don't know why a child behaves the way that they do, the natural response can be to try and get them the tough love approach, try and push them. That might make the child feel more anxious or low in mood. Then the parent panics that they think they've made things worse.
Oh, yeah.
Then they step back. And then things build up to the point where they feel like, okay, I need to do something about this. And then they get into another pushing, trying to get the young person to get out of the situation by pushing. And that can often cause a lot of difficulty. Parents and young people can get stuck in that pattern. So I think the NVR is really, really helpful in getting the parent to understand the child and knowing that they can't control the behavior. I do think there's an aspect of this work that requires something that's not typically NVR, but it's that separation of the illness from the child. And what I have found really with parents is they can really connect with the idea of resisting the illness, the anxiety, the suicidality, the eating disorder, whatever this illness is. They can connect with that because that allows them to connect with their child whilst resisting the illness. So something along the lines of, I will not allow anxiety to run our lives anymore. I love you and I know how difficult this is for you, but I can't let it ruin our family.
That's such a strong message. I was just imagining, Vas, when you were talking about the staff on the ward and how a parent's position can be really easily erased by the staff taking over that kind of parental role, that parental responsibility and or authority. And not only are the parents now suffering with their child's anxiety or illness, but they're also witnessing their position being erased. How does that manage, and how can it not manifest in that setting?
I think that's a very important point, because I think that can happen very easily. We have the skilled professionals who can do, or you may feel as a parent that they can do something that you weren't able to do for your child. And being potentially in a position where you might be judged, blamed. So that's a very vulnerable position for parents to be in. The unit that I worked on was a very open-minded, very family-focused unit. And they really wanted to work together with the parents. And that's where having an NVR approach as a ward, as an inpatient unit, or as a community mental health team is really helpful, because you recruit the parent as your supporter.
Yeah.
And you and the parents work together in trying to resist the effects of this illness and the effect it has on the parent, on the child, on the family. So the working together part is really important, and professionals being able to facilitate that.
Have you got any good examples to share of a family where they have been supported by the unit to work, in a collaborative way, and some of the more positive outcomes for the parents by doing that?
I think the unit I worked with it's hard to say there was one single example, because that was very much the way that they worked. I do have an example of when the staff started using more actively NVR, because I think their philosophy was very much aligned with nonviolent resistance. But from a certain point, we started using the approach more consciously. And there was an example where the staff and the parents did a sit-in together, which was really, really powerful. And certainly, because I was part of it as a staff member, I felt really empowered by the presence of the parents, but also these parents who were dealing with those issues for so long in isolation suddenly also had an ally. Same issues that came up at home were the issues that we were dealing with on the wards.
Yeah.
And so when there were natural consequences as well to the behavior of a young person, say there had to be a certain risk management plan in place, which maybe meant they couldn't go out on that day because there were a risk or whatever, the parents and us were working together and had a common understanding of why that was, instead of the parents fighting the team's decision of why are you restricting my child. We had come to those decisions together. And I think that made a big difference to the parents.
You described earlier about how NVR is frequently known as an intervention that supports families who are experiencing child-on-parent violence. And here we're talking about child's mental health, which perhaps if the young person isn't admitted and they're living at home, there sometimes can be behaviours that are more internalised.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I think that's the challenge for a lot of parents, in that the traditional descriptions around NVR worry them a little bit because they feel, okay, I'm going to make my child's anxiety worse if I make an announcement or if I make a sit-in. But a lot of the work is about separating the illness from the child and making those announcements in relation to the illness. And there's something about helping the parents and working with them to have more presence in areas where the illness doesn't allow them to have presence. So anxiety or OCD might restrict the family's movements inside the house or outside the house. And there's something about the parent being able to say that, I know this is really hard for you. And at the same time, I will not allow this illness to control our family life.
Mm-hmm.
And what I love about NVR in those situations is that it allows the parent to be compassionate, caring towards the child, and resist the illness. Because we do know that when the parents don't take those steps to resist those illnesses grow.
So the anxiety gets bigger, or the disruption of the child's well-being.
Yeah, the eating disorder will get bigger. The suicidality will get bigger because it needs that containment from the parents. And the other thing that's really meaningful, I think, is the support network, because all those kind of mental health difficulties, they isolate the child. But using the support network can help to reconnect the child and give them a sense of belonging again when the family supporters, the family friends, extended family start sending those messages to the young person. We care about you. We heard about something positive that happened in school. We heard about what you did at home. That fosters a sense of belonging and a sense of connection, where all those illnesses are isolating. So it helps to break away from them.
Thinking about parents reaching out to the support network in any sense in our society is a really difficult thing for parents to do. It takes such courage. And if I imagine a parent experiencing child-on-parent violence, it's hard enough in itself. If we now imagine the parents experiencing the young person's suffering, their mental health suffering, perhaps they are refusing to eat, controlling the environment through that format, how much harder it feels sometimes for a parent to share that with people outside of the family, or within the family, or extended family.
Yeah, I think there is still very much a stigma around it. And when it comes to younger people, there's a stigma around the parent. And the reality is most parents have come to see, they will say, where did I go wrong?
Oh, yeah.
Internalize that blame. And we do know that in most situations, these parents have done nothing but their best to support their children. Aylmer was talking a few weeks ago about that lack of a map, if you want, or a compass for parents, which can sometimes make things a lot more difficult in dealing with those situations. That a lot of parents have come from an upbringing that is maybe very strict, very authoritarian, and they've decided, I will not do things based on fear for my child. Never be afraid. They should never be afraid of me. But they don't have a model to work from. I think that's what Haim was saying, and I certainly feel that's the truth for a lot of the parents that come to see me. And I think NVR does give a compass where they can parent in the way that they want to. They can still be parents, but not lose that connection and not parent on the basis of fear.
It's an interesting when a child has a diagnosis. I'm working with numerous families right now whose young people have got a diagnosis of FAST, fetal alcohol syndrome, and quite often parents will struggle with the increasing of parental presence in resisting the harmful behaviours that the child presents, because of their understanding how FASD will restrict the child's learning of society and what's happening in their family, the messages that they're given. How do we overcome that? How do you overcome that in your world?
What I come across a lot is a worry that parents will make things worse, or say, for example, with young people who suffer with anxiety and autism, that, okay, it's the autism that causes that. But parents come to see us because things have gotten stuck. And often I find that they're willing to experiment with something in order to see if it gets them unstuck. I think it's really important to say that when you try something new, like resisting the demands of the anxiety, the demands of an eating disorder, the effects of suicidality, when you're resisting that, things might look like they're getting worse. And it's important to reassure parents that that is part of the issue. It's an ongoing struggle. It will not go away overnight.
Yeah.
But there is good evidence that we know from eating disorders and from anxiety research that when the parent resists those demands that the illness makes on the parent and the family, that disempowers the illness. It lessens the symptoms in the long run.
So what I'm hearing is resistance is key.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's the hardest bit.
Yeah, and how do we coach families to practice resistance when their own anxieties and fear are coming to the forefront, and their concerns about their child and their child's well-being and welfare and development and all of those worries, particularly if they're a younger person who's missing education, missing, their whole peer developments. How do we help parents build on that resistance when they've got all of these other concerns that feel so much greater?
Yeah, it's a leap of faith, isn't it?
It is.
It's a leap of faith, and I have huge respect for parents who take that very, very courageous step. Unfortunately, often parents do that when things have come to a point where they have no other option. And the message that I would want parents to take from this is that, can they take that leap of faith earlier before all their options run out? Because we have seen it work very effectively. In fact, I feel it's the only way to move beyond certain issues, especially when a young person themselves don't want to cooperate. If the young person can engage in treatment and in therapy and they're at that point, then maybe then there are other options. But when they don't, the parents are the only vehicle, really.
Just thinking about the repair that the intervention brings about repair, doesn't it? Repair of a relationship, which is really the other prominent starting point about repairing. I was thinking about what do the staff need in the units to carry this forward? What do they need as practitioners to help them carry this message forward to families? Because they're working right at the front with the child and they're working with the parents.
Yes. I think if I can go back to your previous question about what the parents need and your comment about their repair, because I think that's the common factor in what the parents need and what the staff need. And they need connection with their child. So you can't resist without having that connection. I think building on the relationship and the connection is the first part of nonviolent resistance. And that's where sometimes separating the illness from the child a little bit can help. Because if the illness controls the family a lot, then the parent can be exasperated. But seeing the distressed child as separate to the illness behaviors can really help to foster that connection. So on the unit, the staff did a lot of going out to Costa for coffee, doing makeup evenings with the young people.
But there are other coffee shops.
There are other coffee shops, I must say. I must say, yes. So going out for coffee, going out for a walk to the park, doing things together. I've had male staff members having their nails painted by the girls in the ward, all sorts of things. Watching YouTube videos together, having that connection comes, it is essential, really. You can't really do the other bit. And I think that reassures the parents as well. When they have that connection, it can make it easier to take the step to resist the demands of the illness, whatever they are. There is a slight difference, I think, with suicidality, because it's hard to resist suicidality in that way. And I want to make that distinction. That connection and presence are really, really important when young people are having suicidal thoughts, and building on those times together, but also moving to a more focused attention and not being afraid to ask questions. Are you feeling suicidal today? Do you have plans? Yeah. So this is how you resist suicidality, but bringing it into the conversation and making it more obvious so that you can be more vigilant then. Yes, but in all of those situations, I think the common need is to have a connection with the child and people looking after themselves as well. That's really important. The staff on the unit have a lot of support, a lot of recognition from colleagues. And that's really important. I don't think you can do it without that. And so the parents also need to, sometimes they put themselves last, but it's really difficult work to do, really exhausting, really draining. A lot of doubt for the parents. So they need to refill their energy in some ways.
It's highly emotive, looking after a young person or your child who's so poorly. It must feel very bleak and lonely.
Yeah.
as we describe in our training, that self-care is the priority that we focus on all the time. If parents aren't replenished themselves, it's harder or unlikely for them to be able to replenish others, but they have nothing to give. And so, it is the fundamental, isn't it? The start. You were describing separating the illness from the child, as we describe working within CPV is separating the violence from the child, and the familiarity of our language, but just in different context. But how the work is fed in, the parents are coached in the same respects.
Yeah. And I think it can really help the parent when they see, okay, it's the anxiety that's stopping my child from being able to go out for a meal with me, or from being able to sit in the living room with us if there's OCD, and resisting the demands that the illness makes is easier than resisting your child that you love.
Yeah. I wonder how parents adopt that kind of ethos, really, of communicating with their child in this. Maybe this is a really new way for some parents. How do you begin to introduce that to families?
I start talking about it in that way. I start saying, so the anxiety is having a big impact on your child's life. So I start talking about the anxiety or an eating disorder in those ways. What does it make your child do? What effect does the anxiety or the eating disorder or the self-harm have on your family life? How does it affect how you feel about yourselves as parents? So I start talking about it in those ways. You mentioned something earlier on about the support network and how isolating and lonely it can be for parents in those situations. And I wanted to say something about it's also the solution to the loneliness, isn't it? And often there is a big stigma, but I find that when parents approach families and friends, people are often more compassionate than parents anticipate that they will be. And I just wanted to come back to that because it is a very lonely position. And often with young people who have those kind of they're dealing with those very difficult symptoms, that isolates the family. It means often they can't go out, they can't have a family meal. It can isolate the whole family. And I think it's really important for the parents to have that connection with either other parents or their family.
It's crucial, isn't it?
Yeah. As much as it is for the child to have that message of belonging, it's also important for the parent to have that message of belonging. And of course, they can then also help to resist the demands of the illness.
Amazing. We could talk for hours, I think, about...
Big topic.
Such a good topic. I think in summary, what's brought home to me is that starting point of repair and connection, compassion and support and self-care, not so much the action to start with, but really building on how parents can be kind to themselves, to be kind to their child, to reconnect with their child, for the work to begin, to find support in each other, to find times when they can confidently leave their child and replenish, to come back with a fresh mind and to reconnect with others, to support them, is I think just a really prominent feature in your work.
Yes.
In all of our work, but particularly in inpatient unit.
Yes. And with parents who are dealing with mental health, that's the basis, really. This is where they can start, and such an important step. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Vasi. It's been really nice speaking with you.
Pleasure.
Yeah, okay, so it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me. Thank you.
Thank you.